Cognitive linguistics, in general, is a relatively new approach to linguistics. Is the idea that language is um, part of all the cognitive processes that we have in our brain, in our mind. So language is a human cognition skill, like any other, like memory, images, and things like that. The fundamental principle of cognitive linguistics, particularly for us, cognitive semantics, as I said, is language is another part of human cognition. So we're going to study that from that perspective. It emerges, probably something think that it emerges in opposition to what we call structural linguistics or generativist linguistics, like Chomskyan linguistics. Um, some people believe that it is in opposition to that, even though we see some connections between the two approaches to language. The Because it's not that structural or generativist like Chomsky linguistics, structural linguistics, we believe that cognitive linguistics is more functional, not as formal as structural linguistics. So we're more concerned with the functions of language, the usage of language, basically. We don't explain grammar, or cognitive linguists do not explain grammar from this Chomskyan structuralist perspective. Um, we care about the context where language is used. We take into account how humans use language in a particular situation for a particular purpose. Also, another difference from Chomsky linguistics is that Chomsky believes that language is a module. It's a separate module from other things, from memory, separate from that. Um, in this approach, we see language not as a module, but as part of any other cognition process that we mentioned before. It's a cognitive skill. The We believe that we create meaning, we process meaning while people are talking or interacting. We call that online construction of meaning, and that's crucial for cognitive semantics. In this approach to language, we do not make a huge distinction between semantics and pragmatics, as we have done so far in the class. And also, we don't make an emphasis on what we study in logic, truth conditional values, for example. These are not relevant issues in cognitive linguistics. Meaning is, in this approach, based on conventions of humans, concepts that humans have developed in their brains, in their minds. And a lot of these ideas and concepts come from what we perceive, what we see, what we capture through our senses. So that's why we say that this is very perceptual, and it is processed in the minds, starting from those perceptions. In the mind, in the minds of humans, we set up ideas, concepts, images, or categories of ideas or thoughts. We construct those meanings or concepts or ideas or thoughts by living. We are born, we live, we grow, we see things, we perceive things, we hear things, and then we start constructing concepts, thoughts in our brain of the things we see, of the things we perceive, of the things we touch. All this knowledge that comes to us through our senses is part of our encyclopedic knowledge that we have mentioned before. So in cognitive semantics, the meaning is basically concepts. Every human goes through a process of conceptualization. Every human brain goes through a process of conceptualization. In other words, putting concepts in our brains, in our minds, based on our experiences in life. From this perspective, then, we believe then we can say the language is, again, a cognitive skill. And this particular skill, unlike others that we mentioned before, like memory, imaging, and things like that, it allows us to refer to the world that we have around us. Not necessarily the real world exactly, but at least the world that we perceive, again, concepts. In other words, language is something that allows us to refer, describe, point at the world as we have conceived it in our brains, in our minds. That's why we say that words, expressions, utterances, sentences, they are just clues that activate those concepts that we have in our brains already. Um, for example, if you look at these three seemingly black dots that you have on the right of the screen, the bottom of the screen, you see a triangle. However, really, I can argue, I can prove to you that there is not a triangle there. But we all can see the triangle because we use our eyes in particular ways. So there is a way that we can actually see that triangle there, even though the triangle is not there really. So that's what language does. Language helps us to connect to the world. Um, it is not really important or necessary that it tells us about the real world. It's just enough that it points us at what we believe the world is. So the words we have, the morphemes we have, they just activate cognitive schemas. Schemas are those images, those concepts, those ideas that we have set up in our minds uh, while we live, what we experience things, we see things, we hear things, we touch things. So a word like, for example, desk, D-E-S-K, when you say that or when you write that, the only thing you do is, if you say it to me, if you write it to me, you are just forcing me to think of a concept that I have in my mind about a certain entity that has some features. Four legs, for example, is wooden. We put books on it. All of those ideas are embedded in that D-E-S-K word. The desk itself is not really an important issue. It's just a symbol. But I need that. That's a clue. Just it's a hint for me to think of that concept of desk that I have in my mind. This is more or less the process how we progress through this conceptualization that I have mentioned before. We live, we are born, we experience the world, um, and we normally experience the world using our bodies. So our bodies, human bodies, are a crucial element of all of this cognitive processing of language. Okay, um, we feel with our ears, eyes, hands, with our five senses basically. We call this particular part of the process or progression of conceptualization, we call that corporization. Corpor comes from the idea of body or embodiment. Um, then, using the senses, we perceive, and this is the stage of perception. We perceive those stimuli, visual, acoustic stimuli, tactile, etc. And then we receive a lot of stimuli, thousands of stimuli, and we attend to just some of them. Because remember, if you uh, are silent for a second or 5 seconds in your room, wherever you are, if you can stop the PowerPoint or this video for a second, you're gonna hear relatively nothing, but there is still sounds around you. Interestingly, however, you don't pay attention to those sounds because they're not relevant for whatever you are doing. or they might not be relevant. But there are some sounds, like right now, the words I'm pronouncing. Those sounds you do pay attention to. You don't pay attention to the fan or the AC or the computer electric functioning, even though there are some sounds there. You don't pay attention to that because they're irrelevant. You pay attention to what is foregrounded, in this case, my words, my voice, for whatever reason. That's what you pay attention to. Then we categorize. We form those concepts we have already seen, we have lived, we have paid attention to some sounds, not others, we have paid attention to some images, not others. Once we have attended to those, then we use them to form ideas in our brain, in our minds. Um, if we keep seeing a certain animal that lives in the backyard of our house and we see that every day, and that's an animal we had never seen before, let's say it has 5 legs or 3 or something strange. Now you need to start forming the concept of that new entity in your life you didn't have before, but because you have seen that thing, you have heard that thing several times, now you start paying attention to that. Now you develop a concept of this strange animal. And then you make it into a category. Maybe you call it an animal, um, something weird, some type of category. We humans, we normally categorize concepts. We put them in groups, in categories. Colors to one side, animals, names of things, tools, senses, feelings. We categorize according to whatever we have seen and we already have stored in our minds. And finally, then that particular concept that has been categorized, now we're going to give it a name, a word, an expression, a morpheme in the language. When it gets to the language, we call that encoding. One of the things we use a lot for encoding is metaphors, for example, especially for things that we hadn't seen before. But in any case, we begin by experiencing things, seeing things, perceiving things, paying attention to some, creating concepts, categorizing those concepts. If they are important for our lives, then we lexicalize, we give it a name, we give it a word, we give it a morpheme in the language. And I'm gonna give an example. Let's say, um, let's use the example of metaphors and see how that works with this process here. Um, Metaphors are interesting because they help us to understand new things in comparison to something else, to something that we already have in our brain, that we already have in our minds. It helps us understand newer things or more complex things, for example, like the word back. You know, it starts with the basic primitive concepts. Back starts the idea of back. The first meaning of back goes back to our first experience as humans, our first primitive experience as humans. We have a back in our bodies. Remember, the body is a crucial departing point for this process in a language. So, the original meaning of back is simply that part of your body that is in the rears of your body. That thing we call the back. Once we have used our bodies that way, once we have established that as a concept of our bodies, the back, now we can talk about some other things that we might understand or compare to the idea of back that we already have in our bodies, in our brains because of our bodies. And now we use it in expressions like, I'll call you back, I back you up, back in my days. Those are metaphors. They are non-literal language expressions. Um, we we believe that as in the same way that our bodies have a back, then we extend that to maybe believing that houses also have backs, schools have back, places have back, which is the posterior part of that entity. But again, that comes from the metaphor of the body, the back of our bodies. The So they developed from that original primitive body-based experience, and now we can extrapolate that to talk about more abstract things, like the examples here. We call that embodied cognition, and that's how we process language. And here you have the example, the image, have the body, we have a lot of things around us. The starting point is what we call the origo, or the origo point, the deictical point. Remember, I, here, now. Everything begins with me, my body, my here, my now, this time. And from there, now we extrapolate to different places, different time frames, different persons. But it starts with your body. It starts with the corporization idea. And then you extend that to other people, as you can see in the slide here. Remember, the first part was corporization, the use of our bodies to perceive the world. And now we perceive with the five senses, as I said before. We get the stimuli, we bring the stimuli, or the stimuli come to us through the five senses. And remember again, what we perceive is not necessarily reality, but really it doesn't matter as long as we all agree, that's fine. As I said before, when you say a couple of minutes may not mean two really, but it's okay. It's not really the point. It's just a few minutes. That's what we mean. So what we put in our language, in our words, is not necessarily the exact reality of the world, but that's okay. We humans, we're okay with that. That's what we perceive. That's what we communicate. We have different illusions. I'm not gonna go over all of them, but my point here is that the different illusions are just my way of saying, of arguing that what we express in our language is not necessarily the reality. It could be an illusion, but that's fine. Remember the example I gave you with the triangle and the three black dots around. There was no triangle, but we saw it anyways. We saw it. When I say saw, I put in quotation marks. We saw the triangle because of our perception, even though it was not there. A lot of people, several linguists have done studies on color perception because they see that it depends on the vantage point that you have. You might care about some hues, some spectrum of the colors, and not others. For example, in some languages, they only have three words for colors. Others only have two. Others have five. So it depends. It's not that those eyes cannot perceive color. It's that we don't care. In our reality, in our life, then the color distinctions are not really relevant. Maybe in society that have, like our societies where we have a lot of clothes and outfits, colors are really important, like matching colors and whatever. Maybe other tribes, other groups of people that don't have a lot of clothes, maybe that the color system is not really that important. So maybe they don't have that many terms for colors. So we only lexicalize what we care about, depending on our perspective, our vantage point. That's what the vantage theory says. Here you have some examples of what different languages have done with different colors. Um, so when you speak, it is important that you consider the perspective and the knowledge of whoever is listening to you. Let's call it the hearer. You when you speak, you need to understand what the conventions are, what that language has decided to lexicalize or not, what context you are in, what you think the people that are listening to you can uh, already know about the topic or not. You need to consider that before you speak. You have to, in a sense, calculate what they know or not. We typically assume that there has to be some common ground between the two interactants, the speaker and the hearer. There has to be some commonality, otherwise we wouldn't be able to communicate. For example, you need to share the same language, the same context, the same world. Otherwise, it would be hard for you to communicate with somebody. Um, and that's how we process linguistic interactions in everyday life. As I said, we perceive a lot of things, but we only pay attention to a few of those. So it would be impossible for us to pay attention to everything. We probably would become crazy if we process every stimulus that comes to our eyes or ears. For example, here at the bottom of your the screen, you see under the word foregrounding, backgrounding, you see something. It depends where you put your eyes. You're gonna see something or not. For example, if you believe the background to be the white section or the light color, you're gonna see something. But if you um, process the darker part, the brown part as the background, you're gonna see something else. For example, try to perceive the lighter part as your background. Hopefully, you're gonna see the word Jesus, um, because your eyes are foregrounding the brown letters J, E, S, U, S, and then the lighter part you are backgrounding that, and that is what happens when we pay attention. We foreground some things and we background others. That's part of really what cognitively happens in our minds when we process not only language but any cognitive um, uh, process. We call this perspectivization, in other words, to put something in perspective or not. We also call that profiling, like putting a special profile picture in your Facebook, Instagram. Um, we also call that foregrounding or backgrounding. These are different ways, different words to say the same thing, bringing some things to the front and leaving other things in the back section of your brain, for example. Um, in grammar, we do that a lot. For example, passive voice is a cognitive process. It's a way of cognitively foregrounding some things and backgrounding some others. For example, when you use passive voice or passivization, we foreground the object. Well, used to be the object in an active voice sentence. For example, the author wrote the book. But now if I want to foreground the book, then I put it as the subject now. The book was written by the author, or simply the book was written. So these for passivization, uh, cleft sentences, topic movement, syntax movement, verb movement, lengthening, stressing, emphatic voice. These are grammatical, linguistic resources to do cognitive foregrounding or backgrounding. Categorization, remember, after we have perceived, now we put things into categories. And we do that. That's our human nature. We categorize people. The first time somebody comes to you, even without words, you immediately need to put in your mind, you tend to put in your mind some things about this person that you see for the first time. Is this person reliable? Is it good to connect with? Sometimes you need to know the nationality of the person or the race or the worldview, even the politics and different criteria. But you tend to set up an image in your brain, in your mind about this person, you categorize the person. That's a human tendency. We also do that with language. This idea of fufu here is a kid came to a restaurant, and the baby, it was maybe like 1 year old, saw the salad, the picture on your right, saw the salad on the table for the mom. When he saw the salad, he said fufu, and it happens to be the fufu is the puppy's name, is the name of the pet of the kid at home, and you see the fufu is on the left. But you see, what does fufu mean to him? Maybe fufu simply means two black dots in the middle of something, surrounded by this hairy-like appearance. So that's what fufu meant to him. That's why the salad with this look was fufu, and the dog with that look was also fufu. So he categorized everything that has this look is fufu for him. We tend to do that. We categorize countries, we categorize continents, or these Middle East countries, Latino countries, and we categorize in many ways. But that's part of our cognitive processes. Um, we typically compare what we already have in our mind with things that we see new. If you see a new entity, you immediately um, take that entity that you hadn't seen before, and you compare that to images that you have in your brain. You compare that to a prototype. You have ideas about what an animal is, for example. So if you see a new entity, you want to know if that's an animal, you go to your brain and you know what the features for animals are, and then you decide if that thing is an animal or not. That's what we call a prototype, and is that's what you reserve or store in your brain. Because prototypes, you recognize faster. This is the typical ideal element of this category. They are learned faster. These basic categories are defined with fewer words. They mention in more in memory list. For example, let's say blue for us is a basic color, but navy blue is not. That's why you use fewer words to refer to blue than to navy blue. And also that's you learn first blue before navy blue. That's normally how it happens. And you have some examples here, like languages with noun classes, for example. They categorize a lot. As we studied before, Swahili is a noun class system language, and they do classify nouns according to animacy or humanness. So that's a type of category. And we have different types of categories, as you see in those eight members of the list in the screen. The In the book that Lakoff wrote, this famous book, Women, Fire, and Danger, there was one language where these three nouns belong in the same noun class. Now, why, I have no clue. But it was something to do with that reality of those people, what they lived, where they lived. For some reason, something happened there that they perceived some commonality between women, fire, and danger, and that's why they belong in the same noun class or noun category. And it changes from culture to culture, from country to country, but we do categorize in this same way. Finally, you form schemas or images in your brain. I'm gonna give several examples of what we call schemas. Basically, images that have come to your mind based on the concepts that you have set up in your brain because of the things you have seen, you have experienced, you have lived. Um, these are conceptual, basic, primitive conceptual frameworks. That's key to this idea. Um, Look at these examples. The idea of in our brains, we developed, every human, we believe, we argue, every human developed a concept of a container. We have seen things being contained in other things. We have seen things in outside other things because we have seen that a lot. For example, we have seen water in a cup. We have seen, I don't know, we have seen countries in a map. We have seen people in a house. We have seen houses in a neighborhood. We have seen things in others. We developed by this living, by this, by us seeing those things, we developed this idea. Oh, wait a second, look, you know, things are containing others. So we developed the concept of container, and we can draw it. We use drawings like this, that circle with an X inside. So the drawing uh, is that circle with an X inside. The name of the schema is container, and we use it in different language expressions. For example, we say the water is in the cup. In comes from this idea of container, for example. We say also she is in love. So we use the idea of a container as a metaphor to express the idea of love. We perceive, at least in language, we perceive a love as a container of that person. The person is in love, for example. I'll see you in 3 hours. And that's another metaphor. You know, we believe that the period of 3 hours contains that meeting moment. So I'll see you in 3 hours or so. Another thing we have seen a lot is things up and down. Like we were walking and we saw the trees, we saw the fruits above. We were down. So we see the mountains, we see trees up there or people up there, we are here. So we developed this concept of up and down, and the drawing for that is that A line, B, and the name is up and down schema. And again, we use that metaphorically a lot in language, like the prices went up. That's a metaphor based on this basic primitive concept or schema. Another schema that we have a lot is the path schema, because we have seen things moving a lot, cars, chariots, people walking, running, the boats up and down, or moving from one point A to a point B. So we developed the idea of a path thing. Some things, move from one to B. So that's a path schema, and that's the drawing A, arrow, B that you have in your screen. Another one I would like to mention today is the force schema, where we have seen people pushing things and moving them. We ourselves, when we were babies or kids, we touch things, we push things, and we notice that they move. We say, "Wow, it moves!" So we discover something new. We notice that there is force around. That if you use that force on something else, that something else moves, maybe. So the idea of force, that's a schema of force, and that's the drawing that you have at the bottom of the screen. And other examples are we also categorize schemas. So we have containment, path, source, goal. All of those are spatial motion schemas. We have force, as I said, removal, attraction. They are in the force category. We have the cross schema, the orientation schema, the near far schema, part whole. So the rotation schemas, those are concepts that we developed in our brains because of things we saw. We developed a concept, and many of them we use now in language. One of the ways we use that a lot is by conceptual metaphors. Um, Again, I'm gonna go to a schema here. Let's one of the schemas before that we saw, remember, was up and down. Um, we use up and down a lot, so much that we use it metaphorically a lot, and we don't see the metaphor now. We have used it so much in our language every day that we lost track of the metaphorical sense of that. Up and down, then we say it's a conceptual metaphor because it has become part of our language every day without us noticing that that is a metaphor. For example, happiness is above. We say I'm happy, I'm up. But the opposite of that is you're sad, you're down. So we are using the schema up and down to express emotions, for example. And here are other conceptual metaphors that we use a lot. Life as a journey. Understanding is seeing. Hearing is obeying. Argument is war. Time is money. Communication is conduit. Affection is warmth. Time as path. Love as a journey. So these are church as a family. These are conceptual metaphors that we use a lot. Then what happened is, starting with that conceptual metaphor, we now use that conceptual metaphor, that idea. It's an idea, okay? Metaphorical or not, but it's an idea. It's a basic idea that we have in our brains already established. Departing, starting with that idea, we now use that idea to express other sentences. For example, let's start with life as a journey. If we see life as a journey, that's why we say um, he passed away, because passing is like a journey. Okay, you passed away. The idea of passing away, that euphemism is based on the idea that life is a journey. Um, the let's say church as a family. Now I call you my sister. Okay, she's a sister in Christ at the church, my brother in Christ. Now we call ourselves brothers and sisters. It comes from the idea that church is a family. So we use the core idea of church as a family, and now we use it in sentences in the language. Metonymies as well, and not only metaphors, but also metonymies. For example, we have four of those here. Container is content. I drank 2 cups of milk today. You didn't drink 2 cups, but we use the idea of a container to refer to the liquid or the substance inside that container. That's very commonly used in English. Whole for the part, or part for the whole, synecdoche, for example. Um, Place for the event, like the Twin Towers changed the United States. We say the Twin Towers, but we refer to the event that happened in the Twin Towers in 2001. Cause and effect. Cause is the effect. We use the tongue to produce language. And now we use the word tongue to mean language, but that's a metaphor as well. Lacob and Johnson wrote a very good book called Metaphors We Live By, and that's where they talk about all these basic metaphors that we use in language in English today. And here we have other examples. Um, we don't forget that metaphors, we use the ideas of one semantic field and we transfer some features of that to another field. For example, the idea of time is money, it came from the idea that we have money. That's a basic concept. We use that as a trading asset or tool. So we know the value of money. We have used it. We have given bills and we receive assets. We receive products, goods, and services. So we know the value of money. That's a primitive concept. And then now we extrapolated that to something more abstract like time that we don't see. And then we concluded, okay, so let's compare let's compare time with money. Time has value. Time is money. So now 1 hour has a value of $20, $30, whatever the value might be. So that's a normal process in language perception and processing. These types of conceptual metaphors or metonymic concepts are conventional, they're systematic, they're asymmetrical, and then help us to see whatever what was abstract. Now we can see it and understand it better. It seems then that we normally categorize beginning with the basics, what is concrete, and then we go to the abstract. What is near, and then we go to the far. What is physical, and then to spiritual, to mental, emotional. What is now and here, to whatever is later, and then Remember, we are very egocentric people. We are selfish. We start with us, our locus, our place, the I, the here, the now, or the origo point, as we mentioned before. For example, let's talk about polysemy. Polysemy is different meanings of the same word, but interestingly, they are connected. I did study on ito. Ito is the diminutive in Spanish. It means little. And I discovered in my dissertation that the primitive concept of ito is little. And that actually connects to our primitive reality of the body. Size is also a primitive concept. We compare our bodies to others, we compare our hands to others, we see size, we perceive size. That's very primitive. And then based on that, then we started using the word diminutive for something for other meanings. So ito means little, but in Spanish today, it can also mean dear. It can also be a flirting expression. It can actually mean something bad, pejorative meaning. So all of those meanings connect to the idea of little, metaphorically or metonymically. We extrapolate, we extend the meaning of little in the same ways that I described before. So, for example, we tend to see little, who are little in our tribe, in our community, children. Children are normally little. And we appreciate children, we love children. That's why you can argue that the meaning dear of little, sorry, ito in Spanish came from this idea of littleness or maybe childness as well. Um, and the idea of flirting came from the idea of dear, uh, and so on and so on. That is what we call a radial category model, because we start with the center, you start with the main primitive concept, and then that concept irradiates to other meanings, to other uses, to other functions. And this is a model of a radial category that can explain polysemy a lot in a good way, cognitively speaking. Um, and here you have another example how this cognitive process can help us understand uh, these metaphorical uses of words, um, like the deontic versus the epistemic must. He must be there. What does it mean? He has the obligation to be there, or I think he's there. There is a high probability that he's there. What? Well, we believe that the epistemic ones, the speculative one, the one that express hypothesis, actually came from the idea of must as obligation, because we argue that obligation is a more primitive concept than hypothesis. So we know as children, we learn to obey, we learn to follow rules, we learn that we must do things. So we learn about duties, or must. So must as obligation is basic. The deontic meaning of must is basic. The epistemic, the speculative meaning of must is not basic. It is a metaphorical use of must. Conclusion, as you see, language is one more of the cognitive processes that we mentioned. Linguistic expressions reflect this model of conceptualizing that we have in our brains. These structures normally are based on primitive ideas, and they typically are related to the body. They start with the body or something very near the body, the human body. We use these basic ideas, structures, to then talk about something else more abstract, more complicated, more spiritual, more beyond the concrete. And we do that typically through metaphors or metonymies. And once they become so embedded in our language, we call them conceptual metaphors, conceptual metonymies. Um, this is a basic introduction to cognitive semantics. Thank you.